What is your experience with dogs?
Basically, I've had dogs my whole life. My husband grew up with a dog that was a police training dropout. So it came to him fully trained, and he thought that's how dogs just behaved.
How many years have you been a dog owner?
Well, since I was 8, and I am now 52.
Okay, so you've had
Off
dogs,
and on, so yeah,
dogs pretty much for your whole life.
right,
And
right.
then, so with your current dogs that were subjected to the shock collar, what was the pitch? What was the sales pitch when you were given the option to use these shock collars?
I would love to say that they did a great sales pitch. They didn't have to do a great sales pitch because all of my neighbors had invisible fence. And I was like, well, they're doing it and other people have done it and it's been all successful and stuff. I don't want to say it was peer pressure, it was peer experience with it. But it was also, despite the fact that I was a dog owner for a very long time, I just had great dogs. I never really had to worry about training the dogs. And I come from the South, so dogs just are dogs in the South. And there's not a whole lot of emphasis on training. So it wasn't until I was in a situation where had behaviors that weren't optimal for our living environment that it really became an issue, and it became very obvious early on where those behaviors came from. So we'd only had the fence for about 2 months when the behaviors really started to become obvious to us that they were occurring and why they were occurring. All of our neighbors had used shock collars for their dogs, and it seemed like a good solution for us without any knowledge of what that actually meant to the dogs.
So it was basically just something you noticed in your community and you decided to do it. Now, did the people who sold you the electronic collars have any sort of warning or any sort of caveats? Like, if you use this, there may be these types of behavioral fallouts?
No, not at all. Not at all. The only thing that they did was they told us that we should train them by walking them up to the edge of the fence and having them get the beeps, the corrective beeps, go away from it and give them a treat for having gone away from it. That was their version of training, basically instructed to put our dogs in a fail situation and then reward them for turning away from the failure.
Yeah, that seems to be a common thing. I spoke to a young lady yesterday, and she said that the trainer who used a shock collar did the same thing. They would shock the dog, then give the dog food, which fear trumps food. So your dog may have such an adverse reaction to it that they don't eat because they're shutting down. What was your experience when you did this training procedure they recommended?
So when we did the training procedure, the dogs were very obviously confused. Even with my little knowledge of dog behavior, I could definitely tell that they didn't understand why they were hearing the beeps. And again, they weren't being shocked at this point, but why they were hearing the beeps. And then we were moving to the center of the yard and giving them treats. They couldn't understand why we were continuing to go into the beeping zone. So they began to avoid, like they would not go that way. They wouldn't walk with us towards the edge of the fence, or towards the edge of the yard rather, because they didn't want to hear the beeps.
So how long did it take for your dogs to obtain an aversive or negative association to the beeps?
3 trips to the fence.
And that's just in the first day?
In the first day, in the first training session, yes.
How many minutes was that, roughly?
Less than 5.
So in
Less than 5.
in less than 5 minutes, your dogs were sensitized to beeps.
Yes.
Wow.
And that was without even the shock. And that really should have been my first clue that this wasn't going to be a successful situation. I was clueless. So the fence people came back the week after, having, given us a week to do this training, which we really didn't do a lot of because the dogs were so averse to it. And they turned the shock portion on to the collars.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just,
Oh, don't cringe yet. You don't know what happened.
I'm already cringing. The first day you did under 5 minutes of just having the beeps and the dogs were afraid. And then the next week they came back and applied the shock. And then what happened?
So they applied the shock. We couldn't get the dogs to even go towards the fence to get the shock while we were involved. So we couldn't walk our dogs towards the edge of the barrier at all with the shock portion on. And the fence people wouldn't leave until we did. So we basically had to drag our dogs to the edge of the fence. I know. To the edge of the fence for them to get shocked and then go away from the fence and give them rewards. Right. If I knew then what I know now.
Well, you're not alone. Again, the young lady I spoke to yesterday had the exact same scenario in the sense that she had had dogs her whole life, but she said she was groomed, the way the sales pitch was. One of the reasons why I'm doing this is to protect consumers as well as protect dogs, because a lot of people who love their dogs,
they're not given any information, or the information they're given is either false or ignorant of the actual impact to the dog's behavior, to their mental health, everything. Yeah, wait until we get to the later questions. So, yeah, you'll see what the impact has been on these dogs.
So you're not alone. A lot of dog consumers are given bad information. And I always say, and I've told this to my clients who feel bad, I'm like, good people get bad information.
Yes.
And they make bad choices. And that's really a matter of if you're going to be utilizing a behavior modification program, it has to be 1,000% safe, right? You can't guarantee behavior. People ask me, what do you guarantee? I say, well, I guarantee I show up on time, I'm sober, and I won't hurt or scare your dogs. I won't hurt, right? And everything that I'm going to give you as a protocol is based in safety and legitimate science. That's the guarantee dog trainers can make. I can't guarantee your dog's going to stay in front of your door when it's open. That's up to you, right? I'm the coach. You put the ball in the net. I'm just a coach.
Right.
So, okay, so you've done the beeping and that had a terrible result. The dogs were really scared. They come back a week later to train your dog implementing the next level of aversion, which is shock, and the dogs are even more scared. So
yes.
Then what's the next step after that?
So the next step, they just left us to it. That was the extent of the training and such. They offered to come back and adjust the collars if they needed more shock, which they did a couple of weeks later, because I contacted them to let them know that our dogs in the backyard didn't seem to understand why they were getting shocked. So they weren't going away. They weren't getting away from the fence. They were staying near the fence and continuing to get shocked. Wait for the cringe. The reason they were at the fence, near the fence, is because we had dogs on either side of us, and their dogs would come out and our dogs would be afraid of their dogs because they were not socialized properly. That's a whole long story. They didn't know how to behave around other dogs, and they had a barrier. So they were dealing with barrier frustration and fear. So they would go to the edge of the barrier and fence fight with the dogs. And now, in addition to fence fighting with the other dogs, they're getting shocked. In addition, their interactions with other dogs was pain.
Top of having a poor socialization history.
Exactly. So yeah, that was when we realized that we definitely had an issue based on the information we had from the fence people that was going to be corrected by giving them more shock. So they came out and adjusted the collars. Now, mind you, it was only one dog who continued to fence fight even when he was getting shocked. The other dog was like, nope, I'm out. And he would walk. Yeah, so they came out to adjust the collar for the one dog, and they wound up adjusting the collar for both dogs because they were like, well, if one dog isn't feeling the shock, the other one probably isn't either. These were two litter mates that we got from a rescue. Don't even get me started on litter mates and rescues and all that other stuff, because that was a learning curve as well, which we have now informed the rescue it's not a good idea. And they've changed their policy to not adopt multiple dogs from the same litter at the same time, or even multiple dogs at the same time, because they look similar. And, they behaved kind of similar as far as the fence people were concerned. They just adjusted both collars. So that meant our slightly smaller dog who was already averse to the whole fence line area at all was now adjusted with the shock collar to get more of a shock.
Okay, so what has been the fallouts after using these shock collars? What's the behavioral fallouts for your dog?
So we stopped using these shock collars within 4 months of installing the fence, much to my husband's chagrin because it's not a cheap installation. It has been 5 years now since that time, and our small dog, the one that was already averse that got the shock collar increased, he is so afraid of beeping. The beeping tone is in nearly every electronic piece of equipment in our house. He has now become averse to me cooking because the cooking equipment has this beepy tone. My husband in the basement has a server, a computer server that occasionally beeps when it mounts to do things. Before that, it has a clicky noise. The beeping caused our dog to cower and shake and like huddle next to the closest human he could get to because it had that clicky noise beforehand. He has associated the clicky noise. So my husband found the beeping and turned that off, but the dog still gets scared by just the clicky noise, even without the beeping tone. Because we have battery backups, and the battery backups came by default with those beepy tones. When we had one power outage, where we had the beepy tones, my husband realized immediately we had to turn those off, and we did that. But now this same dog is afraid of wind, which thunderstorms, I trained them, thunderstorms doesn't even faze them. They'll sleep through thunderstorms. But wind and heavy rain, because he associates those with power outages, flickering lights, so even flashing lights, will cause him to cower in fear. And again, the battery backup has a clicky noise that happened before the beeping started. So now he associates that clicking noise. So I'm now having to train beeps, to neutralize beeps, to neutralize the clicky noise. I can't even tell you how many things in our house have either a beepy tone or a clicky noise. So 5 years, and we're still working through this. And that's just the stuff in our house, in an environment where he feels comfortable, in a situation where he's calm. If we go anywhere and see other dogs on the horizon was cause for immediate concern, which was barking, lunging, just completely over the top. He didn't even know I existed. He would be at the end of the leash, just losing his mind. We can't take him to any place where you would see dogs. Dog parks, not that we want to take them to dog parks to play in the dog parks, but even around a dog park, we can't go. We had a need for someone to watch the dogs, for my husband and I to take a trip somewhere. We can't do that. We can't take them to a kennel anywhere. We have to have someone come into our home to take care of them because we can't take them anywhere where someone has a dog. We have been working on introducing them to dogs slowly. It got to the place where we can't even walk our dogs. We can't walk our dogs because they have such an association with us and the leash and the shock collar and the other dogs that we had to actually hire a dog walking service to walk our dogs to give them more experience with nothing really bad happening on a walk. Even now, we're just now getting to the point where I can walk the dogs in a known environment, have a dog way off in the horizon, and have the dogs be calm. And I can only walk one dog at a time. I can't walk both of them at a time because they spin out.
Well, it's never a good idea to walk more than one dog at a time by yourself.
Agreed. Agreed.
I always tell my clients anything can happen on a dog walk. And with one dog, you got a chance. If you have two, for a dog.
Yeah, it's too much. Yeah.
What have you been doing for training and counter conditioning to repair the behavioral fallouts from using the shock collar?
Great question. So like I mentioned, the beeping and the clicking, I have those on my phone. It's the same methodology that I used for thunderstorms. I have it where I can play that noise on my phone at a very, very low level when the dogs are calm, ready to go to sleep, etc. For the first 6 months or so, I couldn't do that. Like the lowest volume on my phone was enough to spin the small dog out. The big dog would always pick his head up and look and show a level of concern, but he wouldn't get to the point of shaking and stuff. But the small dog, as soon as I have that beepy tone, would just completely shake and shiver and whatnot. So I gave him rewards as soon as he calmed down enough to take a treat, which he wouldn't at first. Like I say, it took 6 months to get to that point. But after 6 months on the lowest volume and me in a different room, I could play that beepy tone, come in and give him a treat. We've gotten, and like 5 years, we've been dealing with this, and it took 6 months to get to that point. We are now at the point where I can play that tone on my phone, but if I change to a different room, for instance, and it has a different echo pattern in our house, if you will, it backs him up a bit and we have to kind of start over. So it's a whole process, and the clicking, I try to throw that in there as well, but we're still very much a work in progress on that.
Are you working with a trainer to help you with this?
I have been working with a trainer. I stumbled upon Homeschool the Dog with Susan Garrett and the Dogs That team, and that has been amazing. That whole environment, that whole community has been remarkable. The coaches have been a world of help, but it also expanded my ideas about dog training and dog behaviors and stuff. So I have voraciously read every book I can get my hands on.
So you've hired other trainers to help you. You've done research on your own.
And I have a local trainer that I consult with. She's been a blessing, because there are some aspects of this that I can't do by myself, and I can't do online that doesn't help. For instance, with the dogs and their reactivity to other dogs, I have to have anchor dogs, and I have to have, what do you call them? Like neutral dogs to work around and such, that I have a level of control with. So she's been very helpful with that. But yeah, the amount of money, my husband could give you a number amount, but it's well into the 10,000 mark at this point in 5 years. Wow. So the cost of the fencing was 1/5 of what we've spent on everything from training to nutrition to vet bills, the amount of medication that we've had to incorporate into their diet, into their daily lives. Yeah, it's crazy.
I live in an area like most of New Jersey where there's people who have large properties. They have a lot of money, and I say to them, you could build a 300 or 500 square foot chain link pen in your yard, which is way cheaper than an electronic containment system and way safer. And they won't get out, because that's another false sense of security that get. Some dogs, and you saw it in both of you, one dog was able to develop a punishment callus, the other dog was not.
Yep.
And some dogs, right, like, I'm chasing that squirrel and I don't care if I get shocked, right? And so I always tell people, when they ask me about it, not only do I explain all the fallouts from using a shock collar or even just sound, but I explain to them, you could ruin your dog and spend all this money, and you could just go build a little pen for them. They don't need your whole yard. It's not safe anyway. Other animals can come in, right? So if your dogs are outside and a coyote comes in and they're on electronic containment, what good is that? At least if they're in a pen, the coyote can't get in there. What would you like the legislature in New Jersey to understand about shock collars and the damages that it does to dogs?
Well, first of all, I'd like for them to know what damage shock collars do to the relationship owners have with their dogs. It breaks down the level of trust, introduces fear and pain into that relationship. That's something we no longer tolerate with children, but we consider it acceptable with our dogs. How does that make sense? These are sentient beings. These are animals with the capability of thinking and processing. And if you don't believe that, you're not training your dog properly. The more you understand how dogs behave and how they think and how they understand the world around them, the harder it is to consider anything like any kind of aversive. In particular, a shock collar, because it is being marketed as a humane tool for animals. And it is the absolute opposite of this. That's what I'd like for them to know.
That's perfect. Yeah, that's bring up a really good point about kids and, just in general, how we don't do certain things when there's behavior issues with children, right? We don't.
Oh, there's one more thing I would like to point out. By using shock collars to deter a behavior, which I've definitely seen trainers communicate that that's the way to do it. If you don't want a dog to bark, for instance, use a shock collar. When they bark, shock them. When they bark, shock them. They'll eventually stop barking. That addresses the symptom. It doesn't address the disease. The disease is the fear or the anxiety or the excitement. And if you're not addressing those, at some point, that shock is going to be outweighed by that emotion, that fear, that anxiety, that excitement. And the dog will give in to the instinct to bark. If it's biting or it's, some other behavior that you've tried to train out with a shock collar, then you're just asking for a very dangerous, you're creating a very dangerous situation.
Well, fear is the underlying cause for aggression. So if you're creating a fear in your dog, you're increasing the chance they're going to become aggressive. Additionally,
Absolutely.
dogs are supposed to bark. It's okay to get excited, and
Absolutely. I want my dogs to bark.
there's going
And
to
I
be
want them to tell me when there's somebody in the yard.
exactly, and there's going to be things that make your dog momentarily scared or startled, such as a knock on your door. And what I always tell
Mhm.
people is, in house number one, they yell at the dog when he barks and someone comes to the door, and you're proving to the dog they've gotten it correct, but actually the dog's wrong. There's no need to be afraid, buddy. It's okay, good boy, right? You're okay.
Right.
We like people, right?
Right.
But in
Right.
this house, they yell, "Hey, got out!" They do something, and then in the other
Right.
house, they praise the dog. They say, "It's okay, buddy. You're okay." And sure, the dog's going to bark a couple of times and become momentarily startled, but they're going to bounce back because you're going to prove to them
Exactly.
you got it wrong. No cause for alarm.
Right.
That's what dogs do. They process everything as safe, unsafe, neutral. That's what they do. It's
Right.
a big thing that Pavlov figured out. Pavlov also figured out predictive value, right? What's the predictive
Right.
value of this stimulus or event, right? I get a leash, it predicts a walk, right? I crinkle a
Right.
bag, even if that bag is coffee beans, the dog's still like, oh, crinkle bag, maybe something for me.
Treats. Yeah.
So dogs are always assessing their environment. Like you said, they're constantly learning and picking stuff up, and there's absolutely no reason to cause them fear and pain ever.
Absolutely. Absolutely.